Now, we've got two stories here in 1 Kings 17, verse 7. So I'm going to read on. So Elijah's been graced with something. You know, he's been readied for what's about to take place. And so the Lord sends him to a widow. And so in verse 7, it says, "Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him, 'Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food.' So he went to Zarephath. And when he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and he asked, 'Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink?' As she was going to get it, he increased what he required. And he said, 'Bring me, please, a piece of bread too.' And I think this is really cool because Elijah's thinking, God called me here. And I know when God speaks, I've seen in my life that he's ready to provide. He sustains his word. And so without hesitation, with boldness, he presents his request to this widow. And we find out the context of this widow is that she's ready to die. She's making her final meal. And he has the boldness to ask of her something. And so God's about to do something in Elijah, but it is a blessing and imparting and enlarging those around him. It's doing something for the widow. And so verse 12, "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she replied, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug," more than GGC has. "I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son that we may eat it and die." Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid." Everybody say, "Don't be afraid." "Go home and do as you have said. But first make a small loaf." Go and do as you have said. Go die. "But first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." Verse 15, "She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family, for the jar of flour was not used up, and the jar of oil did not run dry," in keeping with the word that the Lord had spoken by Elijah. Isn't that an incredible miracle? I think that's like such a beautiful picture of how he prepares the table for me in the presence of my enemies. It's like in the midst of the opposition and the struggle and the famine and all of that, he's going to boast about his goodness through you in his provision. And so let's rewind. The setup can hurt because he uses a situation to stretch you, to enlarge your capacity, to birth greater things. But Elijah believed in God as the provider, but at the cost of a poor widow and her son's final meal. Elijah believed in God as the provider, but at the initial rejection of his request for the meal. And I just think, like, you think about these, you know, when you're in a situation, you know, the same way that Elijah's like, okay, this woman's a widow. She said no already, and I'm about to ask again. He had to be so confident in what he was carrying to go after this. But God was actually using this to stretch him. Apparently, when you're pregnant, it hurts. And when you're carrying a baby, there's a whole lot of like stretching going on. Your skin's stretching, all sorts of movement in your organs. But one thing that stretches and grows and enlarges is the uterus. So the uterus, when the uterus stretches, apparently you feel sharp pain. But you know, in the pain, like sometimes you can think like, man, is something going wrong? Like, what's going on here? Why is there such sharp pain? But the pain and the stretching is instrumental in increasing the capacity of the womb to incubate and eventually birth something larger. And so every step in Elijah's journey is stretching him, and it's a struggle, but it's preparing him for what he's going to birth. Yeah. I remember going to South Africa, and I was quite a lot younger as well. And it was my first invite to this church. And the church wasn't operating in a lot of prophetic ministry, or it wasn't a massive culture where they'd see miracles happening, you know, from week to week. And I remember sensing in my spirit to invite people forward to experience the power of God through healing and miracles. And so I just finished a preach, and I'm like, yeah, that went all right. I think it was a good one. I could finish there, go home, and everything's good. But I felt like the Spirit was inviting me to do something. And it was stretching. It was scary. And I just said, I was like, I'm just gonna head over this cliff and say it. Hey, if there's anyone here that needs a miracle, I feel like God wants to demonstrate His power. And like a third of the room comes forward. Massive crowd. The altar is full. And in that moment, I'm like, flip. Like, I'm not at GGC. Like, I'm on my own here. I got to contend for this on my own. You know, I can speak into the priesthood of all believers and all that, but I got to see this happen. And so I remember getting down from the platform and praying for the first person, and my heart is going boom, 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 boom. I'm quite afraid. and the first person, her problem was she had shin splints. And so she's in a lot of pain all the time when she stands, just like you can feel it. You'd know if it was gone. And so I'm like, okay, God's going to heal you. This is going to be incredible. Just you watch. And I remember kneeling down and praying for her. And I'm like, God, you got to do this because there's another 300 people around her. And so I'm praying. And I remember getting up. I'm like, so, how are you feeling? And she's like, oh, it's the same. And I was like, God, what's going on? But I always remind myself that, God, if you revealed it, you didn't reveal it for no reason. You want to do something here. So in that moment where there's a stretch, I can retract and I can think, man, this is too stretching for me. This is me going beyond where I have grace for. I don't know. But you got to remember, the grace came with His word. The grace came with what He's shown you before. You are grace. You are more prepared for this than you think you are. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to pray again. And I went down and I prayed again. And thank God, He didn't allow it to happen more than twice. I went and I prayed. And then I'm like, as I get up to ask her again, she's just bawling. And she was completely healed of like no pain at all. Completely healed. Like one of those 100% healings. And that opened up the faith in the room for all sorts of other stuff. I found the like sort of testimony sheet that I put together when I was there. The list of miracles was incredible. Like people with glasses restored to 20/20 sight, throwing away their glasses. People on crutches able to walk again. People set free from demonic oppression. People set free from depression, anxiety. Deformed ankles healed. A broken ankle was healed. A dislocating knee was healed. Joint pain healed. Migraines healed. There was someone with a cramping hand, like with the residual pain. It was just like chronic, was healed. And the shin splints were healed. So, but it was scary and it was stretching. I'm like, God, I don't, now what? I was kind of like too far into it to retract. And sometimes, again, that's what God leads us to. It's like, I have to come through now. Like we've gotten to the point, similar thing with this building. We're at the point now where there is a lot at stake and God has to come through. And we believe that God will come through. Do you believe God's going to come through? I think there are many people here in this room that are in a similar situation where you're at the point, I feel like this week I've spoken to so many people that seem to be in the same situation, where you're at the point that God has to come through or you'll be ruined. There are people that are going to have to leave the country that I spoke to this week. There's another person that's completely out of work and it's been too long. There's a couple of people that I'm just hearing like, wow, that's crazy. That's crazy. But what an opportunity.